My mom told me stories of me sleepwalking as a kid. When I discovered, makes me question if I had ever been sleepwalking at all. She said it first started when I was around 5 or 6 years old. She had put me to bed one night, then around an hour or so later, she heard a noise coming from down the hallway. She shut the book she had been reading and went to investigate. She told me that she found me sitting at the kitchen table, pretending to eat. At first, she asked me what I was doing, and after not receiving a response, she approached. Upon closer inspection, she realized that I wasn't awake to respond. She stood there and watched me for some time, as she herself hadn't actually seen a sleepwalker before. She said that I sat there acting as if I were eating, then I would stop and turn to the chair to my right. To her, it appeared like I was having a conversation with someone, though she mentioned that I wasn't speaking any words, more like slight whimpers and groans. I'd then laugh quietly in my seat, then continue eating. After nearly 20 minutes of this, I got up from my chair, took a few steps, and laid down on the floor. My mother then woke me up and told me that I needed to go back up to bed. Well, I don't remember this interaction. She told me I was incredibly confused as I thought I was in bed. She led me by the hand back to my bedroom and tucked me back in. A few months later, this happened again. My mother had gotten up in the middle of the night to get something to drink. As she walked into the kitchen, she nearly jumped out of her skin when she saw a silhouette of someone standing in front of the window. She switched on the kitchen light and saw that it was me, that I was standing in front of the glass, motionless. She walked over to me asking what I was doing. Of course, when she got closer, she saw that my eyes were shut. Apparently, I stood at that window for nearly a half hour before turning and walking back to my bedroom. My mom followed closely to make sure I went back to bed, and sure enough, I did. It was odd for me to hear about these things I was doing after I had fallen asleep. The concept that my body would move when I had no conscious control over it made me nervous. My mother found it somewhat amusing, but I didn't seem to think so. Over the following year, I only sleepwalked a few times. Most of them just ended up with me getting up from my bed and wandering into another room. Before falling asleep on the floor, my mother would usually find me the next morning and wake me up. Then, after nearly a year had passed, my mother had gotten up one night, and while she was passing by my room, she decided to peek in on me. When she opened my door, I was nowhere to be found. She wandered around the entire house but couldn't find me in any of the rooms. Then, as she was walking through the living room, something out of the corner of her eye caught her attention. She saw the vague outline of someone standing outside underneath one of the street lamps. As she turned to get a better look, she quickly realized it was me. She threw open the door and dashed outside. I was apparently standing in the center of the road, all by myself. Luckily, our street was on a dead end and didn't see very much traffic after 9 p.m. She called out my name as she ran towards me, but I didn't seem to react at all. As she slowed her approach, she saw that I was gesturing with my arms as if I were having a conversation with someone. She walked up to me and grabbed my wrist. When she did this, I apparently began to freak out. I started to shout and fight against her as if she were some sort of beast attempting to devour me. A minute or two later, I had woken up and snapped out of my frenzy. When I came to, I asked my mother where I was, and she calmly explained that I had walked outside while I was sleeping. I apologized to her, and she led me back inside. The months that followed, I would sleepwalk almost every other night. It had gotten so bad that my mom had taken me to a few mental health professionals. Each of them told my mother that sleepwalking is quite common in children, and that I should eventually grow out of it. They just gave her a list of things to be aware of if she finds me sleepwalking again, such as not waking me up in the middle of, or gently coaxing me back to bed, etc. These explanations didn't really put my mother at ease. She wanted something a bit more concrete, so she kept searching until she came across a therapist who specialized in sleep disorders. It's such a bizarre part of my life that I barely remember it. All the evidence I've had that I used to sleepwalk all seemed to come from my mother telling me such. I apparently spoke with this doctor numerous times and visited him at least twice a week for 3 months straight. Then, one day my mother stopped taking me to see him, and according to her, I hadn't had a sleepwalking episode since. Nearly 15 years has passed since then, and it all just seemed more like a dream than a memory, as if it happened to somebody else, and I had just heard about it. Of course, I believed my mom. I doubt she would make up something like that. It just never really clicked that I had this problem when I was younger. That was until I was helping my mom clean out some of her things out of her basement. She was going through all her storage and was getting rid of a bunch of old stuff. While I was pulling out boxes out of the rafters, something clattered to the floor. It was a thick manila file folder that hit the ground with a thud. Hoping I didn't break anything of importance, I stopped what I was doing and picked up the folder. After glancing at it, I noticed on the front that it had my name on it with some dates. I looked around to make sure my mom wasn't nearby, and I took the folder into the back of my pants. After finishing up, I told her I'd talk to her later, and I headed back home to my house. When I got inside, I tossed my jacket on the couch and pulled out the folder. As I peeled open one end and slid the large file out, my eyes darted across the front of it. It was records of my time with the therapist. I guess he must have given my mother a copy of these to keep. All of the entries inside were each of the days I had gone to visit him. Most of them were just logs of the sessions as well as a few notes he had taken throughout. One of the last entries, however, drew my attention. It said that the therapist was going to conduct some type of hypnotherapy on me. He had me lay down on a lounge chair and began telling me to relax while continuously asking me specific questions. He asked me what I dream about, and my answer had been written down. I told him that I dreamed of my friend. Reading this, I had no idea who I was talking about. The therapist then asked me to describe this friend of mine. I told him that he was much taller than me, though for a child, that wasn't saying much. His body always seemed to be hunched over. He had long black hair that fell down to his shoulders. His arms were extremely long, like two snakes attached to the shoulders. Each of his fingers came to a point like sharpened knives. The therapist asked me to tell him what his face looked like, and apparently I struggled to describe it. I told him that his face was blurry, like it was covered in TV static. When the therapist pressed further, apparently I sat up in the chair, still asleep, and told the therapist to look at him for himself. I then pointed behind the therapist, and when he turned, he saw nobody there. He jotted down some notes and then asked me what my friend wanted. I told him that he wants to take me somewhere far away so we can both play together forever. He made another note, then through a series of careful statements, he rid my mind of negative dreams. Well, that's what he wrote down anyway. Since that day, I have slept peacefully without any more sleepwalking incidents. All those memories I had from the early years of my life seemed hazy, and I've nearly forgotten about them all. Despite not knowing anything about those statements I made, I couldn't help but feel a bit of familiarity with the description of this friend of mine. As I closed the file, I sighed, thinking about all the things I had said in the notes. I looked at the clock, which read 10:23 p.m. As I stood up from my chair, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I turned and looked at my window. For the briefest of seconds, I thought I had spied someone standing outside. Someone looking at me. Someone tall with long arms, with long black hair. Someone with a blurry face. I blinked my eyes, and when I opened them again, it was gone. I wanted to rationalize that what I had just seen was just a product of reading these files, that my tired mind had simply conjured this hallucination. But for some reason, I can't seem to shake this feeling that those weren't simply dreams I had been experiencing when I was a kid, that they were something much more than dreams, something much more sinister. I can feel my eyelids starting to become heavier by the minute, and for the first time in my life, I'm worried about what will happen if I fall asleep again.